Hello, I am Enrique Quesada, and this is Mexico Centered, a podcast from the Center for the United States and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. Mexico's President, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, has said that the foundations for the fourth transformation of Mexico, as he calls it, have been set, and implied that 2020 will be the year where Mexicans can see improvement in the areas of security and corruption. López Obrador ended the year with 72% approval rating, according to the latest poll by El Financiero. Public opinion on his leadership ability and honesty, as well as on issues like corruption and the economy, are favorable, although at much lower numbers. The reality, however, is that homicides continue to rise and the economy shows virtually no growth. What is the López Obrador administration's plan to change the course of the country as we move into the second year of his presidential term? Do we expect improvements in public security and economic growth in 2020? To discuss these matters and others, I sat down with Tony Payan. Tony Payan is a François and Edward de Regin Fellow for Mexico Studies and Director of the Center for the United States and Mexico at the Baker Institute, as well as a professor at the Universidad Autónoma de Ciudad Juárez. Here's our conversation. Tony Payan, François and Edward de Regin Fellow for Mexico Studies and Director of the Center for the United States and Mexico, thank you for coming to the podcast once again.
Thank you, Enrique, for the invitation.
So today we are talking about the expectations for 2020 in terms of public security, rule of law, corruption, and other such issues in Mexico, and to see what the López Obrador administration can do about them. In one of his famous or infamous morning press conferences at the beginning of the year, he said that he hopes, and I quote, that we can consolidate the government, bring into practice with good results the transformation of the country. He said, I asked Mexicans this past December that I needed one more year, and I want to inform that the basis for the transformation of Mexico have been established. So in this press conference, he also talked about security, corruption, and these issues that we're going to discuss. But aside from this grandiose rhetoric, I wanted to begin with security. What have we seen, and what are we expecting for this year?
Yeah, I think before I answer your question on security, I think it is important to look at the rhetoric of the president, right? You may remember then when he took office in December of 2018, he promised that he would actually solve the problem of security within 6 months. And then in May, when 6 months ran out, the president asked for another year. And here we are, almost another year, and the situation is worse than ever. The president, I think, Mr. López Obrador, that is very good at addressing himself to his base, at keeping the spotlight on him. He uses political symbols very astutely, and he's quite good at distracting people from, the real problems of the country. But here we are, 14 months into his presidency, a presidency that is going to last 5 years and 10 months, because in 2024, the president will take office not on December 1st, but on October 1st. So the transition period is shortening. So this will be a sexennial, 6 years, that will last only 5 years and 10 months. We're approaching a quarter of his presidency. That is a year and a half. And yet no results whatsoever. And in fact, many different issues, public policy issues in the country keep deteriorating. So the president, on the one hand, has this rhetoric and asks for patience and sometimes for unity and on and on. On the other hand, his public policies have been a disaster, truly a failure. On security, I think we ended 2019 with nearly 38,000 homicides, of which about 32,500 are essentially related to violence and crime. That is a record. I mean, we thought that things could not get worse in Mexico, and yet here we are. I don't see any progress in building the National Guard, half of which 27,000 members are deployed to the southern border to contain immigrants. The conditions in which immigrants are living in Mexico are more atrocious than ever. At least in the past, they were allowed to transit through Mexico and move on to the U.S. border. Now they're being detained under very inhumane conditions, and of course the National Guard deployed against them. That is really something that slowly is sipping into the consciousness of most Mexicans. And of course, the economy is not doing well. So on many different scores, by the way, the latest thing is the deployment of the new healthcare system.
Right.
Yeah, the INSABI, or the Institute for Health and Well-Being, or whatever it is, has been a disaster. So in the end, I think the president is a very good politician, competent politician. He obviously knows how to go and travel around the country and how to go to his base and continue keeping his base alive. On the other hand, his public policies have been a disaster. I don't see for the year 2020 any real changes. His cabinet is relatively almost incompetent, really. I mean, he doesn't allow them the autonomy, the independence, the power to decide and to make decisions and choices to solve problems. Everything has to come from him. So I don't see what's different in 2020 from 2019 that might actually propel the country to solve these very important, huge public policy problems the country is facing today. I don't see any structural change. I don't see any reforms that can help. And I don't see the leadership being able to take the country to the promised land. So I would take whatever the president says, which you correctly quoted, with a grain of salt.
Right. So I was looking at the most recent poll by the newspaper El Financiero, and some of the questions they asked about how they rate the performance of the López Obrador administration on several issues. And the only area where the results were actually unfavorable was security. In other issues, such as the economy, opinions are favorable overall, with 43% approving of the performance compared to 31% disapproving. So given the lack of growth in the economy and actually the persistent loss of jobs, this doesn't seem to make much sense. So as you say, like, he's a good politician. What do we see about the economy? Like an actual number rather than, of course, the perception that he seems to be very good at, speaking and making sure that people approve of his administration.
Well, I think that Mexicans are a very sophisticated electorate. We should not underestimate the ability of Mexicans to implement corrections at the ballot box. And I think the president will see that in the coming, not this year, not 2020. There's only local elections in 2 states. I think the state of Hidalgo and Coahuila. But I think Mexicans have used the polls very effectively. The fact that there is an enormous gap in the president's approval as an individual. Most people in Mexico believe that he's well-intentioned, that he's a good-hearted man, that he wants what is best for the country, that he is possibly even a moral man, and on and on. And they're making a distinction between that and his performance in public policy and also his political party. Let me break this down for our listeners a little bit. Because people think of the president so highly as an individual, his approval ratings are probably about 65%, 67%. 2/3 of the country approves of the person of Mr. López Obrador. When you break down the issues into security and the economy and healthcare and on, you can see huge gaps that go from anywhere between 10 percentage points to 25 percentage points, which means that people are willing to give him personally the benefit of the doubt, but they're having very serious misgivings about his performance as a governor of Mexico, that is, as the president, as a political leader in Mexico. And people can make this distinction very well, and I think they are making that distinction. So we shouldn't confuse the approval of his own personhood with approval of his policies. The gap shows that people are still giving him personally the benefit of the doubt, but there are some serious issues with his policies. That's one. And then let's take a look at the third element, which is his political party. A recent poll showed the Morena party, the president's party, with about 36% preference among the electorate. 36%, right? That's his base. That was his base in 2006. That was his base in 2012. And I think it was his hardcore base in 2018. 36%. The PAN, of course, has got to get its act together. It's down in the doldrums, 12%. And then the PRI and other parties are even further below. But if you look at the same poll, 42% of all Mexicans expressed no partisan preference. That's very telling, because that means that 42% of the electorate are up for grabs.
Yeah.
And it means that in 2021, when Mexico has a midterm election, in which it will be the largest election in the country because the entire lower house of Congress, the House, will be elected, and of course at least half the governorships and thousands of mayoral seats, maybe. Not sure. There's about 2,600 mayoral seats, so maybe not thousands, but certainly in the 1,000 plus. Yeah. So it's going to be a major election in the country. And I think that's where the Mexican electorate can go to the polls and make a political correction and rebalance the system politically. They did it in 97, when a midterm election under Cedillo. They did it in 2003, the midterm election under Fox. They did it in 2009, the midterm election under Calderón, and they did it in 2015, the midterm election under Peña. I don't see any signs that they're not going to make another correction in 2021, the 2021 election. This year will be a very difficult year for the president. He's not going to be able to blame others for the disaster, because people are going to say, hey, we understand that you blamed your predecessors, particularly Calderón, who was who presided the government so many years ago, almost 10 years ago. So at that point, he could probably displace the blame. I don't think it's going to be possible to do that easily on the second year. And that is when that 42% of Mexicans who have exhibited no preference for any one political party can say, okay, time for change. So Mexico is a country in flux. I think this year is a defining moment for the president. He either sets the foundations for his success. I doubt it. I don't see anything. Or he sets the foundation for a political correction in 2021. So this year will be key.
So before coming back to this polling numbers, which I love to talk about, I wanted to address a little bit about corruption. Because the president, as usual, says that corruption is over, especially at the top, that we no longer see corruption. But we just had this instance where his administration decided to turn a blind eye to alleged corruption by Manuel Bartlett with an investigation that has been characterized as a simulation, which kind of echoes back to what previous administrations have been accused of doing. Last year in the podcast, though, we had Santiago Nieto, director of the Financial Intelligence Unit, who talked about the work that they have done to combat corruption. Right. So, and I think this work should be commended. So, how do we put this two together, right? And what can we expect to see in 2020?
Well, here is the way I see the issue of corruption, and you are absolutely correct in talking about corruption. That has been the president's single most important flag, political flag. It was during the campaign. It is probably what gave him that additional vote that he got to get to 53%. And it has certainly served to justify a lot of the decisions he's made and to justify a lot of his failures. Because you have to know that this president is very, very effective at displacing blame to others. And very often when he fails and his policies fail, he alleges sabotage, corruption, and on and on. So he's very good at not taking responsibility for what he does, right? He's never going to be the kind of president that says, I am the president and the buck stops here, the way Eisenhower said it in the 1950s. In other words, acknowledging that he's ultimately responsible for what is going on. Whatever happened in the past, he's the president now, and the problems are his. He's never going to acknowledge that. To this day, he continues to blame others and blame corruption and sabotage and a number of things. Just in the failure of deploying the healthcare system that he's trying to implement, the INSABI that we just talked about, he alleged sabotage. Well, it's auto-sabotage, really. I mean, it's self-sabotage. It's the fact that they don't seem to think through the implementation of the public policy. You may remember President Obama when he unveiled the Affordable Care Act and the huge problem they had with the website as they deployed this government-led insurance program and on and on. If a country is competent, technologically competent as the United States, they had problem deploying that healthcare program. Imagine what Mexico that still has a healthcare system that looks like 1970. So, but he's never going to acknowledge that. He's never going to acknowledge that it's their problem, their planning, and their policies. So corruption has been absolutely essential for this president to create all kinds of excuses for his failures. Is there corruption at the top in the government? Yes and no. On the one hand, I do believe that most of his cabinet is working hard as best as they can because he doesn't empower them to make decisions. I do believe that they're trying their best to be honest and to be non-corrupt. The problem is that you do not always control everyone within your government, and so there is slowly evidence that the relatives of these collaborators of the president are positioning themselves within government. That's called nepotism. That's corruption. So there's some of that going on, perhaps not as widespread, but it's going on. We haven't yet – there are some signs that this is going on. Nobody has yet measured it, not that I can tell, but that's going on. And there are some signs that some individuals working in government are asking for the famous moche, which is and overpricing public works and public contracts. So he's not been able to control everyone within his government. So there is some progress at the top, but not the progress that the president would like to see. There's still a lot of cleaning up to do that he's not been able to do. Nobody should expect him to do it in a year, but his own collaborators are sabotaging his own campaign, anti-corruption campaign. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, corruption exists at many other levels in Mexico. I think we have to understand that corruption is a matter of opportunity. There is an opportunity for somebody to make a buck. It's mostly an economic phenomenon. Willingness, that is, that the individual be willing to engage in corruption, and impunity, that is, that the chances that you get caught are essentially zero or close to zero. So let's call it the OWI formula: opportunity, willingness, and impunity. Those are the ingredients that fuel corruption anywhere, that allow people to engage in corrupt acts. I see plenty of opportunities in Mexico for corruption at many different levels, even within his own cabinet. It doesn't look good that he justified Mr. Bartlett, who is attributed the 1988 electoral fraud, in addition to not being transparent about his properties and so on. So there's a number of issues there. There's plenty of willingness to engage in corruption in Mexico at all levels, down to society, and impunity is rampant in Mexico. Impunity is something that you're supposed to fight with smart tools like WIF, the Financial Intelligence Unit that you mentioned and that Santiago Nieto leads in Mexico. Unfortunately, my suspicion is that the FIU, the Financial Intelligence Unit, is being used selectively with more political purposes than anti-corruption purposes. If you look at the way that financial intelligence is being used, many of the most, visible public cases are individuals that the administration wants gone. Not the least of which is, of course, the former Supreme Court Justice Eduardo Medina Mora. He was sent a message, get out of the Supreme Court, we want that seat for one of ours, and you have to leave. And he was pushed out through financial intelligence investigations. And he's gone, and they were able to assign somebody. And slowly, bit by bit, they're trying to disable a lot of the potential political enemies and political contenders in the future. I'm not saying that some of the financial intelligence unit investigations are not genuine and credible and correct and good, but that is one thing, and the other thing is that it can also be used to disable political opposition leaders and enemies and even potential enemies. So I don't see an even, neutral, impartial, balanced use of financial intelligence the way many other people see it. I see it as an important tool being used, perhaps mostly for good, but I also see it as a powerful political tool, and they're using it very effectively. And so in that sense, I don't see yet that the president has achieved a system that you could say corruption will end, and it will end at all levels, and it will leave no one untouched, including those that collaborate with the president.
So to conclude, I wanted to kind of come back to López Obrador's approval ratings, given what you've said about not seeing the security economic situations really improving, and the fact that the approval ratings for his party or support for his party and performance on other issues is not it's quite low compared to his own approval ratings, right? And so I'm wondering if this is the year where we see these numbers go down, where reality catches up to him, or to echo research scholar Rodrigo Montes de Oca on the previous episode, that the gap between his rhetoric and reality will widen.
I disagree with that. I think the president will remain largely popular, personally. I think his popularity will remain upwards of 60%. Because Mexicans are generous. I mean, if you look at the approval ratings of almost every single president since at least Salinas, we're talking about 88 to 94, 94 to 2000, 2000 to 2006, 2006 to 12, 12 to 18, and today, at this exact point in time, most of them had their approval ratings were in the 60s and even 70%. The lowest was Peña Nieto, who was particularly unpopular in the country, the president between 2012 and 2018. And even at this time, he was 52%. So he was over 50%. And he was very unpopular.
Right.
So clearly, to me, we shouldn't read a whole lot in the popularity numbers. The real vulnerability, I think, comes when you parse out his performance item by item, public policy space by public policy space, and when you look at his collaborators and when you look at the political party preference. You have to remember when in the 2018 elections, the president got 53% of the vote. Mm-hmm. But his political party got 10 percentage points less than that, 43, 44%, whatever it was. So clearly there is a good portion of Mexicans who are more than willing to defect from the president's political party preference. And that's, I think, what we ought to be paying more attention to. And 2021 will be an important year. We will either Rodrigo Montes de Oca will be proven right or something in the middle, or we will be proven right. But I would look at the performance this year because his honeymoon is running out and his ability to displace blame is running out, and that's going to be important in 2020. If 2020 is a bad year for security and economics and the economic issue, the opposition will certainly have a message by the end of this year. They will coalesce, likely PAN, PRD, and MC, the typical coalition, and then the PRI here and there, quite weakened, but perhaps in some states like Campeche and Durango, whatever, where it's still sort of strong. And then the battle will be race by race, district by district, and municipality by municipality.
Well, Antonio Payan, Director of the Center for the United States and Mexico, thank you for answering these questions.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
That was Tony Payan. That is it for this episode. Thank you for listening to Mexico Centered. Thanks to Lisa Wakata, our program manager, and to Tony Payan, the director of the Center for the United States and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. You can visit our website at bakerinstitute.org/Mexico, where you can find our latest publications. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guests and the host and do not necessarily reflect those of the Center. If you have any comments or suggestions, you can email us at usmexicocenter@rice.edu. We would love to hear from you. Mexico Centered is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Radio Public, and Spotify. You can subscribe through your favorite podcast app to receive all of our new episodes directly on your phone. I am Enrique Quesada. I will see you next time.